Well, hello guys, today is day 2 of creating a good question. So today we're going to review a little bit and then just spend some time looking at some questions to determine what's the important parts of those questions. So today, my paper doesn't want to change to the next slide. There we go. So remember from yesterday that our testable question is measurable. So something we can measure, count, changeable, something that can be changed, repeatable, and we have the resources that we need. So we've talked about, maybe in the past, you remember from last year, the thing you change and the thing you measure become the variables in the experiment. So the independent variable and the dependent variable. A good question is something you can change and something you can measure. So the independent variable is the thing that you are changing, if you remember that from last year. And the dependent variable is the thing that you are measuring. So here's a question. Does the amount of light affect algae, that's the green stuff that grows on the side of a tank, algae growth in a fish tank? So thinking about, is there something that we can change? Is there something that we can measure? Is it repeatable? And do we have the resources we need? If you're at home and you're watching this, you can't drag the icons, but think about, is this a good question or not? Would I give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down? And this question is a good question because it's measurable. We can measure the amount of algae that grows. It's changeable. That's the independent variable because we can change the amount of light. We can repeat this. We can use different tanks. We could do it repeatedly with the same tank. And we have those resources. We could find a tank. We could find fish. We could find algae. All of those things are available to us. So in this experiment, does the amount of light increase algae growth in a fish tank? What is the independent variable? The dependent variable is the independent variable is what you change. The dependent variable is what you measure. In the experiment above, what would be the independent variable? What are you going to change in this experiment? Think about, is it A, the amount of light, or B, the algae growth? So what are you responsible for changing? Good. The answer was you are changing A, the amount of light. So since you're at home, you can't interact with this slide, but you can think about the answers. So let's try another one. How does the time of day affect the amount of sounds frogs make? Is this a good question? So again, is there something we can change? Is there something we can measure? Is it repeatable? And could we have the resources we need? Think about it, thumbs up or thumbs down. This is a good question because it is measurable. We can change something, we can repeat this, and we have the resources we need, or we could find the resources we need. So in this question it says, in the experiment above, what would be the independent variable? What are we changing? Again, here we are changing B, the time of day. So we can affect which time of day we go and observe. We cannot change. We can't affect, personally, we can't tell the frogs to make more noise. We can change the time of day and see if that affects when they make more noise. Okay. So I'm going to ask you in this video, or if you're watching this, to stop the video and go and watch about the first minute. It's about 50 seconds of the octopus video. If you watch the whole thing, that's okay. But think about, what is one scientific question you have about the octopus? Okay. So you're going to come back now and we're going to ask you to think about one question that you have about the octopus. So you watched the video. So a good or a testable question, again, is measurable, changeable, repeatable, and resources are needed. So are the resources needed available? This would be hard for us to write a testable question that we could find the resources available. Now, could a scientist, and did they do a test to figure out what was wrong with what was causing the octopus to do this? Yes, if you want to go back and watch the rest of the video, you'll find out that it's actually what is actually causing the octopus to start to pull off their own arms, which is kind of a strange thing. But we would have a hard time coming up with that question, and it's hard to find something that's measurable or changeable. This is more of we're going to look for the answers to this question, and so we could look and see, we'd have to collect data as to how often we found whatever was causing that. So we could create a question, but it would be hard for us. So now I want you to stop again, and you're going to watch this video on testable questions. Normally, if you were in the classroom, we're going to stop the video and talk about it. But if you can stay in the classroom today and listen to that video or listen to the lecture with me, and I'll talk about what's going on in this video. But it's a really good video showing how a scientist actually goes about making sure their question is testable. It takes about 7 minutes, and then I want you to come back to this video. It doesn't work to play the videos through the Screencastify because they get all echoey and weird. So what I want you to do is stop this video, go and watch this video. It's on slide 14, and then come back and finish this video. So a good question, again, is measurable, changeable, repeatable, and the resources are needed. And in the video before us, they talked about that same thing. They talked about it. They just used a different acronym. They used a SMART acronym, which we can talk about again. But we're basically doing the same things, which is interesting because that's college and beyond. That's graduate level research, and they're using the same set of kind of basic guidelines we are to determine if a question is a good one or not. So that was reassuring to all of us. It should have been that we are doing real science here. So we're going to practice this. So I'm going to ask you to think about, in this experiment, okay, what would be an independent variable? What are they changing in this experiment? In that experiment, what they're changing would be the color of the light to see how that affects plant growth. So they're changing the color of the light. And then what would we measure? There's a whole series of things that we could measure. We could measure the height of the plant. We could measure the surface area of the plant. We could measure how deep the roots grow. We could measure the color of green that the plant has. There's all kinds of things that we could measure, and we can be very creative. We can measure how long it took them to germinate, how long it took them to grow to a certain height. There's a lot of things that we can measure when it comes to plants. So now, there's kind of different formats when you write a good question. If you already know what your independent and your dependent variable is, it really makes it easier to write a question. So the question's format is you kind of just insert the word. So does the independent variable affect the dependent variable? So I'm going to ask you in the next slide to try to write a question. So using the resources, so we know that our independent variable is the color of light, and our dependent variable, we can pick one. The height of the plant would work, the surface area of the leaves, the time to germination, all kinds of things. So we're going to ask you to create a question. So create a question about the light experiment using one of the prompts to the right. So you're inserting the independent variable and the dependent variable. So if you're waiting at home, so if you're doing this at home, we could do it a number of ways. We could say, does the independent variable affect? So we would say, does the color of light affect the height of the plant? We could say the question saying, how does changing the color of light affect the height of the plant? I could say, if I change the color of light, will it affect the height of the plant? And then I could also say, what is the relationship between the color of light and the height of the plant? All of those are good independent questions. I can measure them, can change them, I can repeat them, and I have the materials I need to do them. Let's try one more. Okay, here's kind of like the experiment I talked about in class yesterday. Oh, my lights just went off. Okay. What would be our independent variable here? So what are we changing? I want you to think about it if you're at home. Yep, we're changing the type of water. So spring water, bottled water, distilled water, and tap water are all different types of water. So we could change the type of water. And then again in the plant, what are we going to measure? We can measure all kinds of different things. We can measure that, like we talked about. So this time, let's measure the time to germination. So how long it took until we saw little green sprouts coming out of the dirt. Okay. So the independent variable, again, is here are question formats. So I want you to, again, create a question about the water experiment using one of the prompts to the right. So I'm going to stop and break for a minute so you can at least think about it. Remember, our independent variable was the type of water, and our dependent variable was time to germination. I forgot it. So does the type of water affect the amount of time to germination? How does changing the type of water affect the time to germination? If I change the type of water, will it affect the time to germination? And what is the relationship between the type of water and the time to germination? All of those, again, are good, solid questions. So again, at the end of this time, what we would now want to do is talk about do some research. Before we move on in our project, we've got our question. Now we want to do some research. So if I was researching the experiment about water, I would research maybe what's in the different types of water. I would research what's the right amount of water, because I'd want to make sure I wasn't overwatering or underwatering my plant, and that affected how they grow. So I want to do some research. I also might find out, is there somebody else that's already done this, and could I learn something and then adapt my experiment a little bit? So maybe we already know that the best type of water is, I can't remember the 4 choices. The best type of water is tap water because it's still got some minerals and nutrients in it. So maybe I find out, well, maybe I try well water. Maybe well water is better, or maybe I go and get some water from the river and see if that water works better. So there's all kinds of things that we could change about that experiment if we do some more research. So that is all for today, and I'm glad that you joined me, and I hope that you learned a little bit more about questions today. We'll see you again on Tuesday of next week. Remember, there is an assignment Monday, but we'll see you on Tuesday.